Okay, so let's unpack this. Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. 2.5 million copies sold just in English, translated into, what, 19 other languages? It's staggering.
Absolutely staggering.
But here's where it gets really interesting. Frankl himself didn't just see that as, a personal win.
No, not at all. He actually saw it quite differently.
He felt it pointed to something deeper in society, a kind of collective misery, almost. People just desperately looking for an answer to that big question. What's life really about?
Exactly. In the preface to the '84 edition, he basically frames the book's huge popularity not as some literary success story, but as a symptom of our time.
It's a symptom, wow.
Yeah, suggesting that so many people connected with it precisely because it hit that nerve, that universal hunger for meaning.
Right. So that's what we're doing in this deep dive. We're plunging into man's search for meaning, and we're mainly drawing from two key parts. Frankl's own incredibly harrowing account of his time in the concentration camps.
Which is just, well, essential context.
Absolutely. And then his explanation of logotherapy, the whole psychological approach he developed from it all.
Right, his theory.
So our mission here isn't just to, recount the history, however important that is. It's really to pull out the core insights. Human resilience, the search for meaning, even when things seem absolutely hopeless.
And the fundamental ideas behind logotherapy itself.
Exactly. Think of this as maybe your shortcut to grasping these really powerful ideas. And crucially, thinking about how they might, click with things in your own life.
And it's so important to get that the camps weren't just a backdrop for his ideas.
No.
They were the crucible, the place where these theories were forged, tested under the most extreme conditions imaginable. That first autobiographical part, it's the visceral proof for the logotherapy, he explains later. They're completely intertwined.
Okay, so let's dive into those first days, that initial shock of arriving at the camp. Frankl talks about this sudden realization, this feeling that a prisoner has nothing to lose except his so ridiculously naked life.
That phrase is powerful.
It's just this brutal stripping away of everything.
Yeah.
Everything external.
And that nothing to lose moment, it was like a psychological earthquake. Frankl noticed it often led to this strange, cold, detached curiosity, almost clinical.
Detached curiosity.
Yeah.
About what horrors were coming next.
Yeah, like the mind trying to create distance, protect itself somehow.
No.
The really profound insight there is when everything you have is gone, what's left, your inner self, your will, that becomes incredibly clear.
And yet somehow, even in that horror, people found anchors. Little things.
Tiny things, often.
Images of loved ones, he says. Their faith, for some. Even that really dark gallows humor.
And surprisingly, nature. Glimpses of nature.
A tree, a sunset. Things you wouldn't even notice normally.
Right. And those seemingly small things, they really highlight our resilience, don't they? Our ability to find little sparks of beauty or connection, even in total desolation. For many, faith was already there, a structure for meaning, something bigger than the suffering.
But that fragile inner world was constantly being attacked, wasn't it? The whole dehumanization process.
Relentlessly.
Losing belongings, the shaving, the showers, and then realizing what was happening to others. Seeing the chimney.
The chimney, that became the inescapable symbol, didn't it? Industrialized death. That whole initial phase was defined by that shock, that awful confrontation with the unthinkable.
And pushing away memories of their old lives. That was a defense.
A necessary one, Frankl observed. You had to compartmentalize. That past life felt completely disconnected from this brutal present. It was too painful otherwise.
He also mentions this promise he made to himself right at the start, not to run into the wire.
That chilling phrase for suicide, touching the electric fence.
And he says, strangely, in those first moments, he didn't even really fear death itself.
Well, in that initial shock, the suffering was so immense, the odds so tiny, it sort of paradoxically lessened the fear of death for some. Compared to the daily torture, suicide might even seem less terrifying. Frankl grimly notes that the gas chambers, in their awful efficiency, almost removed the need for self-destruction for some. It's a horrific thought.
God. Then there's that stark advice from an older prisoner he mentions. Shave daily. Look fit for work.
Pure pragmatism. Brutal calculus of survival.
And this term, Muslim.
Chilling. It wasn't just descriptive, it was a death sentence. If you looked like a Muslim, weak, unable to work.
You were selected. Straight to the gas chambers.
Without delay. That's the awful reality behind that term.
He also talks about the emotions, the sheer overwhelm, longing for home, disgust at the filth.
Visceral reactions.
And he gives that awful example of new prisoners forced to clean latrines and punished harshly if they showed any disgust.
That deliberate mortification, breaking down normal reactions, it was a tactic designed to shatter their self-worth, their basic dignity, constant filth, suppressing natural responses. It led to that emotional numbing later.
Which you see in that example he gives, watching a corpse being removed and feeling nothing, complete indifference.
And that indifference, that emotional anesthesia, it wasn't cruelty. It was a tragic but essential psychological shield against constant overwhelming horror. The mind trying not to shatter completely.
But even near misses, like beatings that didn't quite land, he says they caused immense mental pain. Why?
The injustice. The sheer arbitrary nature of it. He talks about working on the railway track, carrying those heavy girders.
Yeah.
The senseless cruelty was a constant mental torment. It wasn't just the physical pain, it was the insult to your humanity, the reminder of total powerlessness. That feeling of being utterly disregarded could hurt more than the blow itself.
Then there's that encounter with the really brutal guard. But Frankl feels indignation.
Yes. Even then, that spark of indignation shows the human spirit refusing to be totally crushed.
But then a flicker of hope. A sympathetic capo, being in the front rows.
Right. The capos were prisoners with some authority. A sympathetic one could be a lifeline, offering small protections. Being in the front rows at roll call, maybe avoid the worst jobs, or the attention of the cruelest guards. Small margins, but they mattered immensely.
And even the foremen who showed some kindness, they still didn't get it, did they?
No, they couldn't grasp the reality. They'd compare the prisoners' output to healthy workers.
Completely oblivious to the starvation, the stress, the constant threat of death.
Exactly. That gap in understanding, it was huge, almost unbridgeable. The prisoners were operating under such extreme duress, it changed everything about their capacity. Outsiders just couldn't comprehend it.
So moving into that second phase, Frankl describes entrenchment, routine, and apathy becoming the main symptom.
Apathy, yeah. But he stresses it wasn't a choice, it was necessary, a self-defense mechanism.
How so?
It was about dimming reality, tuning out the emotional intensity, focusing only on immediate survival tasks, conserving precious mental energy, building a wall against the horror, basically.
And just making it through another day was a relief.
A huge relief. That quiet thought, well, another day is over. It speaks volumes about the constant crushing pressure. Just enduring till nightfall was a small victory.
He also mentions this cultural hibernation, like intellectual life just stopped.
Mostly, yes, with two big exceptions, interestingly.
Which were?
Politics, well, rumors mostly. Constant talk about the war, liberation, fueled by any scrap of news, however unreliable.
Clinging to hope.
Exactly. And the other was religion. A surprising depth of religious interest emerged for many.
Really, in that environment?
Yes. Whispered prayers, secret improvised services. It provided a spiritual anchor, a sense of community when everything else was gone.
Then the typhus outbreak in 45. He describes the awful symptoms.
Terrible. Fever, delirium.
And the fight just to stay awake, to stay lucid, including his own effort to reconstruct his lost manuscript.
Incredible, isn't it? That battle against delirium, holding on to clarity. It shows the strength of the will. Rewriting that manuscript wasn't just intellectual, it was defiance. An act of holding on to purpose, identity, against forces trying to erase him.
He even mentions occasional scientific debates popping up. And a spiritualist seance seems almost surreal.
It does. But it underscores that deep human need for intellectual engagement, for connection, for meaning, even in the most bizarre circumstances. The seance may be a desperate grasp for answers, for something beyond the suffering. That yearning persisted.
But it's in these moments of finding meaning, real connection, that you really see his core ideas forming. Like that experience on the march, thinking of his wife.
Ah, yes, a pivotal moment.
This realization that love is the ultimate goal, the power of her image in his mind.
Absolutely pivotal. Realizing that love could transcend physical presence, even death. That became central to his philosophy. Her image was this inner sanctuary, a source of strength the camp couldn't touch. It shows the power of our inner world.
And that phrase, it lux in tenebris lucet. Light shines in the darkness. That sudden flash of purpose amidst it all.
That piercing of hope through the darkness. It exemplifies that human capacity to find significance even when suffering seems totally meaningless. A testament to resilience.
He talks about art too, like hearing a tango hummed, and humor. He calls them weapons of the soul.
Essential weapon?
Even shares that dark anecdote. Action. Action.
Art and humor, however fleeting, were crucial psychological escapes. They let prisoners transcend the horror momentarily and maintain a sense of self. Humor especially offered detachment, a way to rise above suffering even for a second.
And the analogy he uses for suffering, like gas filling a chamber.
So important for understanding his view. It highlights how subjective suffering is. It fills your whole consciousness, regardless of how it looks from outside. What matters isn't the amount of suffering, but your attitude towards it.
He mentions gratitude for tiny things, too. Negative happiness, he calls it.
Yes, gratitude for the absence of further suffering, a less brutal guard, a moment of sun, finding tiny pockets of positivity. That negative happiness became precious.
And dividing his bread ration, purely mathematically, he says. No sense of sacrifice.
It underscores the extreme deprivation, the focus on pure survival. What might seem selfless normally was just about calculation, endurance.
Then the loss of values, the struggle to keep any self-respect, being reduced to just a number.
That systematic dehumanization chipped away constantly at self-worth, at their moral compass. Being a number meant being disposable, interchangeable. Trying to hold on to your values, your dignity in that environment. An immense, often losing battle.
He gives those horrible examples. The sick thrown onto carts, trading prisoner numbers.
Chilling illustrations of how devalued human life became. People reduced to identifiers, their stories, their worth, just erased by the system.
He even made a will at one point.
A final act of identity, almost, a connection to a future he probably wouldn't see.
And then that twist, being sent to a rest camp while cannibalism was starting in the camp he left. He links it to that old story, Death in Tehran.
That juxtaposition, the rest camp, the horror he left behind, the old tale, it just highlights the utter randomness of fate. How you might escape death without even knowing it was so close.
And then his decision not to escape when he had the chance. To stay with his sick patients.
An incredibly profound moral choice.
And the inner peace he felt afterwards.
It's a powerful example of finding meaning through responsibility, through commitment to others, even at great personal risk. That peace came from acting in line with his deepest values, even in the worst circumstances.
And finally, that story near the end of the first part. Forgetting the third dead body during the escape attempt.
Almost surreal. It shows the psychological toll, the trauma, even planning for freedom. The reality of death was so pervasive.
And the guard's sudden gentleness.
Maybe reflecting the shifting power as liberation lay closer.
Culminating in his prayer for peace.
A deep, universal longing after everything he'd endured.
So liberation finally comes. He describes the physical recovery. Ravenous eating.
The body desperate for nourishment after so long.
And talking nonstop.
Yes, years of suppressed trauma, emotion, finally finding release, an overwhelming outpouring physically and emotionally.
But then, disillusionment, how could that be?
It was the realization that the end of the physical horror didn't magically fix everything. The psychological scars remained. Suffering, he realized, has no real limits.
So reintegrating was hard.
Incredibly hard. They had to grapple with those invisible wounds, try to fit back into a world that felt almost alien after what they'd experienced.
And he mentions losing the ability to feel pleasure, having to relearn joy.
Heartbreaking, isn't it? The trauma had just dulled everything. It was a slow, difficult process to reawaken to simple things, warmth, safety, a good meal, things they had to learn to experience again.
Okay, let's shift now to the core theory that came out of all this. Logotherapy, in a nutshell.
Well, he calls it the third Viennese school of psychotherapy.
Different from Freud and Adler.
Fundamentally, Freud focused on the will to pleasure, Adler on the will to power. Frankl said the primary drive, the most fundamental human motivation, is the will to meaning, the search for purpose.
That's the core difference.
The absolute core. Humans aren't just driven by pleasure or power, he argued, but by this deep inherent need for meaning. It's even more essential for our well-being.
And he backs this up.
Yeah, he mentions polls from France and Vienna. Overwhelming majorities saying, yes, they need something to live for, even something worth dying for.
So it's not just an abstract idea.
Not at all. It's a widely shared human need, cutting across cultures. Empirical support for his main point.
Then he talks about existential frustration and noögenic neuroses. What are those?
Existential frustration is what happens when that fundamental will to meaning gets blocked or isn't fulfilled.
Okay.
And if that feeling of meaninglessness gets deep and persistent, it can lead to what he called noögenic neuroses. These aren't caused by psychological conflict or trauma in the traditional sense.
Like Freud would say.
Right. They stem from that unmet need for meaning in the spiritual dimension, the noölogical dimension, as he termed it. Think of it like traditional therapy might dig into your past conflict, but sometimes the problem is right now. Feeling like your life just lacks purpose, like an engine running with nowhere to go.
He gives that example of the patient whose analyst kept focusing on father issues.
But the real problem was his job, vocational frustration, a lack of meaning in his work.
It really shows the need to address that will to meaning directly.
Exactly. It shows the limits of only looking at past conflicts. You have to address the person's active search for meaning now, in their work, their relationships. Sometimes the distress isn't buried deep in the past, it's in a present lack of meaningful engagement.
And he makes this important point. Not all suffering is, like, neurotic.
No. He argued some suffering can even be a human achievement when it comes from that genuine existential struggle, the difficult search for meaning. That struggle itself is a sign of our humanity, our self-awareness. It can lead to real growth, resilience. He challenged the idea that all suffering is automatically bad or pathological.
He shares his own story here, too, about losing his manuscript in Auschwitz.
Incredibly powerful.
And being determined to rewrite it from memory. That was his survival mechanism.
It links directly to his idea that mental health needs that tension between who you are now and who you could become, who you feel you ought to become.
That striving is healthy.
Yes. That commitment to reconstruct his work gave him a compelling reason to endure. It wasn't just about avoiding anxiety. It was a driving force for psychological well-being.
Then he talks about the existential vacuum, this feeling of emptiness, meaninglessness.
He saw it as increasingly common in modern life.
Why?
Because we've lost or weakened the old guide's animal instincts, strong traditions, so people feel adrift, empty.
And that leads to problems.
Big problems. Conformism, following totalitarian ideas, chronic boredom, that Sunday neurosis feeling when leisure time feels empty. Also, depression, aggression, addiction, people trying desperately to fill that void. It's like being a ship without a rudder.
So how do we find meaning, according to logotherapy? He outlines 3 main ways.
Yes, 3 fundamental pathways. First, creating work or doing a deed, accomplishing something tangible.
Okay.
Second, experiencing something fully or encountering someone deeply, especially through love.
And the third?
This is crucial. The attitude we choose towards unavoidable suffering.
So it covers action, connection, and response to hardship.
Precisely. Both engagement with the world outside and the inner transformation through connection and how we face suffering.
He talks quite a bit about the meaning of love.
He sees it as more than just emotion. It's about grasping the other person's innermost core, their unique essence.
And enabling them.
Yes, actively helping them realize their potential, truly seeing and valuing them.
And the meaning in suffering, even when things seem hopeless.
This is maybe the most profound part. Even when suffering is unavoidable, you still have the freedom to choose your attitude, to find meaning by transforming tragedy into a personal triumph, a testament to the human spirit.
Like that example of the elderly doctor grieving his wife.
Exactly. Finding meaning in his cherished memories, his enduring love, even after profound loss. It's about shifting perspective.
But he's clear. Suffering isn't necessary for meaning, right?
Absolutely not. That's a misconception. Suffering is inevitable, but not required for meaning. The point is, meaning is possible even despite suffering.
He tells that story about finding a page from a Hebrew prayer book in the camp.
A powerful moment. He saw it as a personal challenge. Live your thoughts. Embody your beliefs. Even here, even now.
He also mentions metaclinical problems. People seeking meaning itself, not just symptom relief.
Right. It highlights that deep human yearning that goes beyond just feeling okay.
And the logodrama technique, with the mother of the handicapped son.
A fascinating technique. Asking someone to view their life from their deathbed, it can bring incredible clarity, reveal meaning hidden by daily struggles, seeing the enduring significance of her care, her love, from that ultimate perspective.
He asks that question about the ape making polio serum versus a human doing it, introducing super meaning.
Yeah, the idea that there might be an ultimate meaning, a purpose to life, maybe even to suffering, that's beyond our human intellect to fully grasp, acknowledging the limits of reason for the biggest questions.
And his daughter's simple question about the good Lord.
It just highlights the complexity, the paradoxes when we try to understand ultimate meaning. Simple answers don't work.
Then the story of the despairing rabbi. Frankl suggests his survival itself might have meaning, for purification.
Another perspective. That survival, after witnessing horror, might serve a larger spiritual purpose. bearing witness, perhaps, a way to frame even terrible hardship.
He really emphasizes the past, too. Having been is also a kind of being.
Crucial. Our past, good and bad, shapes us. It's part of who we are. Someone who embraces their history, including the suffering overcome, sees the strength gained. It's not just about the present difficulties. Having been is real. It's part of our identity.
Then he explains some specific logotherapy techniques. Paradoxical intention.
Fascinating, isn't it? You encourage the person to try to do the very thing they fear.
Like the doctor trying to sweat more, or the person with writer's cramp trying to write badly, the stutterer trying to stutter.
Exactly. By deliberately wishing for the feared symptom, you diffuse the anticipatory anxiety that fuels it. The symptom often subsides. It's counterintuitive, but effective for many anxiety issues.
He warns against nothing butness, though, reducing people to just biology or psychology.
A core point. He insists we always retain that fundamental freedom to choose our attitude, regardless of conditioning. His own survival was proof.
That irreducible human freedom.
The ultimate freedom of the human spirit, as he saw it.
And that incredible story about Dr. J, the mass murderer, transforming in prison.
Almost unbelievable, becoming compassionate. It shows the potential for profound change, even in seemingly hardened individuals, challenges our ideas about fixed character.
And his psychiatric credo. Dignity and freedom remain, even in psychosis.
His deep respect for every human being. He argued for a humanized psychiatry that sees the person behind the illness, respects their inner freedom, their potential for meaning, for change.
Acknowledging we're self-determining, within limits, capable of good and evil.
Exactly.
Okay, finally, this idea of tragic optimism. What does that mean?
It starts with the logotherapy premise. Life can be meaningful under any conditions, even the worst. Tragic optimism is about actively turning negative aspects into positive ones.
So it's not just being blindly positive.
Yeah, not at all. It's not naive denial. It's a courageous affirmation of meaning despite tragedy, a conscious effort to find growth, understanding, purpose within suffering.
And is built on three things.
Yes, turning suffering into achievement, deriving betterment from guilt, and finding motivation in life's transitoriness, the fact that it's finite.
Those are the pillars.
The foundation. Finding meaning in suffering, growth through guilt, appreciation for the present because life is short.
And he says you can't just decide to be optimistic or faithful or loving.
No, they arise naturally. They're byproducts of finding a real reason, a meaning in your life.
He talks about hyperintention, too, trying too hard for something.
Right, like trying too hard to achieve pleasure, like orgasm. The intense focus can create anxiety and actually prevent it. Happiness, love, optimism, they often come indirectly when you're focused on something meaningful beyond yourself.
And having meaning helps you cope with suffering.
Immensely. It's a psychological buffer against despair, gives you resilience.
And losing meaning leads to give-up-itis.
His term, yes. That loss of hope, futility, when you just withdraw from life. He saw parallels in why some young people with no future might turn to drugs seeking escape when they lack purpose.
But existential despair itself isn't an illness.
Not inherently. It's part of being human, facing life's big questions. But if it festers, if it leads to that existential vacuum, then it can become pathogenic, contributing to depression, aggression, addiction.
And his advice to someone suicidal.
Not just suppressing the thought, gently guiding them to see the possibility of future meaning. Solutions might appear, underscoring their responsibility to stay alive, to find that meaning.
He mentions that Boy Scout experiment.
Carolyn Wood Sharif's work shows how a shared goal unites groups, reduces conflict, meaningful purpose brings people together.
And logotherapy focuses on meaning in each situation, not just some grand life meaning.
Exactly. Like life is a movie made of individual scenes. Each scene, each moment has potential meaning. Find it there, in the here and now, not just in some abstract overall purpose.
He talks about the aha experience of seeing that meaning.
Yes, that flash of insight. Suddenly seeing what you can do in this situation to create value, fulfill a meaning.
And he connects meaning to conscience, even biology. Mentions Charlotte Bueller and Konrad Lorenz.
Right. He acknowledges both looking back at a life lived, Bueller's biographical approach, and the idea that our conscience, our basic values, might be rooted in our evolutionary past, Lorenz. Meaning has both personal history and perhaps deeper biological roots.
He brings up Edith Weisskopf Jolson's point. Being unhappy about being unhappy makes it worse.
Yes. The importance of accepting unavoidable suffering without adding self-pity. allowing people facing incurable illness to find dignity, even pride in how they endure.
And the Yale study on POW is finding growth through suffering.
More evidence for post-traumatic growth. Horrific experiences can, paradoxically, lead to positive transformation for some.
And that Polish cardiologist's definition of heroism in Auschwitz, just maintaining dignity facing certain death.
So powerful, shifting heroism from big acts to inner strength, quiet dignity. The priority is always to change the bad situation if you can. But if you can't, the real strength is knowing how to suffer with dignity. He mentions Austrian Poles valuing people who master hardship with grace.
He talks about guilt, too, the mystery of iniquity, saying explaining away a crime removes responsibility.
Yes, he wrestled with evil. Argued that while factors contribute, ultimately individuals are responsible for choices. Rationalizing guilt diminishes freedom. He emphasized individual, not collective, guilt generally.
And connecting life's shortness to living well now, that quote.
Live as if you were living for the second time and had acted as wrongly the first time as you are about to act now. A constant reminder, live intentionally, responsibly, learn from the past.
And he warns against confusing dignity with just usefulness, rejecting nihilism.
Vehemently, human worth isn't about productivity. Nihilism, life is meaningless, he saw as dangerous, self-destructive, destroys the will to live.
And finally, he stresses logotherapy isn't dogma, calls for degurification.
Right. He wanted it to be open, evolving, encouraged critical thinking, passing the torch to independent minds, not blind following.
And his last point, disagreeing with Freud about hunger blurring differences.
Yes, his camp experience showed the opposite. Extreme conditions amplified differences, showed the depths of cruelty, but also the heights of compassion, like Father Maximilian Kolbe's sacrifice.
So, wrapping up this deep dive.
Oh.
Wow, a lot to take in. But some key things really stand out.
Definitely.
That incredible human capacity for resilience, even against unimaginable odds. That fundamental drive to find meaning no matter what.
The will to meaning, yeah.
And understanding logotherapy not just as a theory, but as a potential toolkit for navigating our own lives.
And what's amazing is how relevant it all still feels today. We might not face those extremes, thank goodness, but we all face questions of meaning, purpose, how to deal with life's hardships.
We do.
Logotherapy gives you that empowering perspective. You have the capacity to find, even create meaning in your own situation, right now.
Which leads to that final thought for you, the listener. Where in your life might you be overlooking potential meaning? Maybe in the challenges you're facing right now. Or how could embracing that tragic optimism, finding achievement in suffering, growth from guilt, incentive in life's brevity, how could that shift your view on current difficulties?
It really makes you stop and think, doesn't it, about the power of your own attitude, your own capacity to find purpose.
That certainly is.
And hey, if this sparked your curiosity, there's so much more to explore in Frankl's writings and in logotherapy itself. Plenty more depth there on these huge, timeless questions.